Today we're going to talk about fabric sourcing and quality control. So as you can imagine, if you've had me before, and all of you had, you know how important good fabric sourcing is, and knowledge of fabric, and really how important fabric is in general to us as fashion designers. It's our ingredients, the same as a chef needs fresh and good ingredients. We as designers need good fabric. They're the ingredients to our creations. So a lot of time goes into sourcing and quality control for our fabric developments for each collection. Now, where designers get their fabric can vary, especially on size. Now, larger companies will be able to order enough fabric or have need of enough fabric to create a collection to have their fabric woven in a mill. Now, mills will typically only take big orders, so big companies, this is a really great advantage. It's also slightly cheaper working directly with a mill, and having your fabric woven is a little bit cheaper than the options available for smaller companies. And again, the more fabric you create, you usually get bulk discounts. So if you're doing a very, very large run of garments, you're probably going to get your fabric at a little bit cheaper than if you're doing a smaller run. So, if you're doing, you need a couple hundred yards, you're going to be paying more per yard than if you need, a few thousand yards. Over 5,000 yards, you're going to get a break. Over 10,000 yards, you're going to get an even bigger break, so on and so forth. Your smaller companies, again, aren't going to have the capacity requirements or the bulk yardage needed to warrant going to a mill and having them create the fabric just for them. So they'll go through other wholesale providers and distributors and look for fabrics that are really already made, that are being sold at wholesale prices. But let's take a look at how we find these connections, how designers connect them. So one of the largest places that designers go to get connected with mills or with wholesale distributors are trade shows. There's a variety of different textile trade shows that aim to connect designers and mills, and many of these trade shows will have a focused theme, such as providing a spotlight on organic or sustainable fabrics. So let's hop on over to the internet for a second and just take a look at some of these trade shows. So I pulled up a website that basically has a list of trade fair dates, and this is in specific is going to look at textile trade shows. So this is all across America, and you can type in your region or city or date and look for specific trade shows that are going on in the area. Now, unfortunately, this spring I'm going to assume that most of them have been closed. But in a normal season, there'd be plenty of these going on. And here's just a few of them coming up, or at least still slated to be coming up. We'll see. We've got textile going on here, and you can click on that to look at more. There's apparel textile sourcing. It says it's the largest textile sourcing show for southern U.S., so this would be the southern area one. Just popping over here, it says it's for technical textiles and non-wovens, so that would be like your a lot of knits and spandex for like athletic wear, and different sorts of maybe vinyls and things, depending on what you're making. Here we have BioFac America. So here's a textile trade show, again, focusing in on organic products, sustainable products, things like that. Here we are, the IFAI Expo for technical textiles. And we can scroll down. These are just the upcoming ones. These are, just to show you quite a few of them. Moda here. So Moda is not necessarily a technical or a textile specific. It's really more for a lot of design and accessories and things like that. Just a general industry one. If you guys ever get the chance to sneak into Moda, I highly, highly recommend going. It's super exciting. You get to see all the new fashions. It used to be super easy to sneak into things like Moda. You used to just sort of be able to go, maybe have a business card from a place you're interning or working, or make your own business card and sort of just show up and get in. They've recently sort of clamped down on this. Again, they're trying to restrict it only to industry insiders, to restrict capacity, because lots of people would come that weren't necessarily connected to a business or industry, just trying to see if they can get some wholesale prices on some new fashions, or just to see what's going on. You can still try it. What's the worst they can do? Not let you in? Of course, I'm pretty sure this is going to be canceled, unfortunately, but next year, again, as soon as everything stops being canceled. And here we go, Tex World. Tex World, I have their own website right here. So, so again, yeah, they're potentially thinking about canceling it. But Tex World is the largest textile trade show in the New York area, typically held at the Jacob Javits Center. And you can read about it here at their website. Typically, when do they have it? It's happening in the summer. And they'll have lots and lots of booths from mills and distributors, all jam-packed into the Javits Center. And you can go around and browse their swatches and get prices and listen to seminars about new technologies and things like that are coming out and revolutionizing fabrics, which is a big thing in the fashion industry. Textile technology and material sciences are continually moving forward. And new developments that allow designers to do new creative things with textiles will always be a big driver of fashion. I remember maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, probably more than that, they revolutionized a way of making these micro-thin suedes. And that spring, all the collections included all these beautiful, very flowing, very sort of featherweight even suedes that before just simply were not possible. And just seeing suede in spring was completely new, because it was never possible to create a suede that was light enough, flowy enough, that would really be applicable in a spring collection. So again, we are constantly coming out, and scientists are constantly coming out with new fibers, new materials, new chemical treatments that will allow designers to use fabrics in a new way and influence the designs. So even if you're not sourcing fabrics, you already have potentially established relationships with distributors or mills, there's still great places to go to keep abreast of all these new developments and technologies that are coming out in the industry. And there's lots of things that affect trends. We talked about trend researching, but I didn't really talk about technological advancements, but that too has a great effect and influence on where trends go and how clothing is made. I'll pop on back to our PowerPoint. We also have the internet. So obviously the internet is working to connect businesses and designers and mills from all over the world. As can be imagined, it's a great place to do that, especially when distances are so great, where design companies may be in one country and the mill that they're sourcing from might be around the world. So many sites are available for designs to search for the right fabrics for the right price. So let's go and head on over to the internet again. I have just a couple just as examples, but you can research yourself. Just do a Google search for, wholesale fabric importers or distributors, and you can find all kinds of companies that will do that. So here's one, high quality textiles. They seem to specialize in sort of dancewear, athletic wear, swimwear, high performance wear. So this is going to be your spandex and things like that for your yoga pants and your workout gear and different things like that. So a lot of stretch, I'm assuming, and you can just sort of go ahead and you can look and browse fabrics by category of what you're doing. Over here, and you can, all here, they have all this sorts of fun stuff. You can, browse yourself. It's going to be part of your assignment, so I'll leave that to you. Here's another one, Monopoly Textile, importer of fine fabrics. They're a little bit different. They specialize, again, in wholesale fabrics. They're actually out of LA. They have their own specialties, so they're specializing in woven solids, laces, and prints. So again, every company is going to sort of specialize in their own niche of fabric. So depending on how varied or wide your collection offerings are, you may have to go to several places, or if you're doing a very small focused collection, you may be able to get all the fabrics necessary from one distributor. Again, really just depends on how big your company is, how varied and wide-ranging the fabrics used in your collections are, so on and so forth. I'm going to pop on back here. Now, as I said before, there are third-party wholesale fabric importers and distributors. You can get in contact with one on the internet or develop your own relation, sort of face-on-face if they're local. And many design companies will choose to work with a third-party fabric importer to help with their fabric needs. Now, a lot of these are somewhat different than the ones that I just showed you on the internet. The ones I showed you on the internet have fabrics available already pre-made for wholesale. So there's no fine-tuning, there's no sort of color control or individual creation by the mill for the designer. It's kind of you pick what's there and you buy it from them. However, a lot of these third-party wholesale sort of connectors will act as liaisons between the designer and the mill. So we'll sort of oversee your quality control, your production, and things like that. And they'll offer those services in addition, not actually providing the actual fabric because the mill is providing the actual fabric, but they'll also offer those quality control services and a lot of times design development services in addition to connecting with the mill, communicating with the mill, and finally producing the fabrics. Actually, in those cases, those companies are very, and also with the ones I just showed you, are very secretive about their actual mill contacts. So if you work with one of these wholesale fabric importers, you may not ever know as a designer what mill exactly your fabric is coming from. The reason being is they provide these quality control services and sort of connections by working with the mill and then simply charging you a higher rate than the mill charges. It might be, a sort of markup percentage, or they may just easily tack on an extra $1 per yard for everything that you buy. And then, so it would be very easy for you once the quality control is sort of completed with the mill to sort of go in and then just purchase directly from the mill as a designer and get that discount, that, whatever they're charging knocked off your price. That's why they're very secretive about their contacts. However, a lot of designers still choose to utilize them because their knowledge and connections with existing mills is very, very wide and very, very detailed and thorough. And then, of course, those services they provide, such as quality control and developing the different colors and prints and textures and things like that, might just be easier for a design company to outsource than to do themselves. Fabric development. So once we've chosen a mill that we know will probably be within our price range and can create the quality and type of fabrics that we need to move on to fabric development. And this will happen for every single collection. And that would oppose, our standing relationships with mills, which might be done, most intensively at the start of a company when we're initially sourcing our supplies. And necessarily would have to be done, in less frequency than our actual fabric development. Fabric development is done for every collection that comes out. The actual fabric sourcing may tweak and add a few new mills or new contacts from season to season or year to year, but will not have to necessarily be done for every single collection. So fabric development really involves getting the right fabric. So once a design company has chosen a mill or importer to work with, a series of communications must occur in order to ensure that a designer is going to get the right fabric that has the right qualities. This will include testing and quality checks for feel, color, print, stripes and plaid quality, color, and durability and /quality. So what does all this mean and how do we do it? So once we have sort of developed our mood board and we know where we're going with the collection as a designer, it's time to start getting our fabrics. Now the mood board and trend research will lay out the color palette and potentially prints or stripes or patterns that are used. So we have that set too. We just have to make sure that the mill is going to create the right colors or prints or stripes for us and also feel. So let's go and take a little bit of a look closer in these different areas and see how each one is regulated and checked in this process, this fabric development process. So the first is feel. So in order to make sure that the fabric we're being produced for a collection has the right feel, or we may call it hand, which basically just means, you know, the feeling of the fabric. A large swatch, which is sometimes called a hand loom, or a quality swatch card will be produced. The swatch card will typically have a swatch of a slightly larger size for that will enable you to kind of feel it, shake it around, see how it flows, see how it touches against the skin, things like that. With this, designers can kind of get a preview of what the final fabric will feel like. Now, if the designer does not like the feel of the fabric presented in these hand looms or swatch cards, they can work with the mill to apply a number of treatments and adjustments that can be made. So there are chemical treatments available that can make fabric softer or shinier or flowier. And I'm not going to really get too into those because they're quite technical, but basically once a fabric has been made, they'll either spray or bathe a fabric in certain chemical cocktails that again will make it either shinier or softer or sometimes flowier and things like that. We can also apply physical treatments like brushing that can make the fabric fuzzier. So when we talk about a treatment like that, like brushing, we're talking about actual literal brushes that are really big, really wide, really flat, and have these tiny little wire bristles. And you brush the top and surface of the fabric to pull up a little bit of fiber to create what's called a nap. And we see this with flannel fabrics sort of most prominently, but can be applied to many other different fabrics to create a kind of soft, fuzzy feeling. We can also apply other physical treatments like sand washing or stone washing, which are pretty much exactly what they sound like. You wash a completed woven section of fabric in sand, and it will kind of soften it, make it a slightly limper in quality, not quite as crisp, a little bit more flowing, a little bit softer in touch, and things like that. So we'll test all of these different swatches, and they'll come back and forth until the designer can approve a sort of feel quality that we like, and move on with that one. Now, of course, color is huge. It is very important to a collection, and designers must ensure that all of their fabrics match what is laid out in their mood board's color palette. Now, this can be a lot more difficult than you think it is. It is difficult because different fibers will take dye differently. For example, a wool might take dye differently than a cotton, will take dye differently than a poly. So different dye recipes must be used for different fabrics in a collection. Traditionally, it was actually very hard to dye things like wool. Until relatively recently, I'd say maybe, the 70s, it really wasn't possible to dye natural wool certain colors. Like if you wanted a hot pink wool, you were out of luck. You could not do that. Fortunately, in the modern age, we've developed new chemical dyes and chemical processes that allow us to dye even wool pretty much any color that we want. However, even though we still have this wide array of options and pretty much an infinite array of colors that we can dye pretty much any fabric, we still have to fine-tune our dye recipes for each fiber, because whatever sort of dye recipe or chemical cocktail used on our cotton fabrics might not be the exact same color as our wool. So we need to fine-tune each dye recipe to match our standard colors. And then again, this is important because if I have a wool sweater that's supposed to be a very specific pink, let's say, in a collection, and I have a cotton that's supposed to be the same pink, I need it to be the exact same color. I don't want it to be a slightly different pink or something like that. Of course, if they're slightly different, what's the purpose of making the color palette anyways? The color palette is meant to set strict restrictions on colors used. So we want all of our fabrics to match our color standards exactly. So to ensure color consistency with solid dyes or piece dyes, so these are typically fabrics that are woven first and then dyed as a whole. They use what are called lab dips to test and match colors. So here in the images, I have a picture of a woman calculating the chemical recipe used in a textile dye formula, and then just a rundown flow chart of the dyeing process. So swatches are collected by buyers, sent, so these this would be the collect color swatch of buyer would be the designer sending the mills their color palette from their mood board or whatever else, their color standards for the new collection. Based on those colored standard swatches, the mill will create a recipe formula. The dyes will take place, dye testing will take place. They will keep all of the quality buyer requirements. Basically, this is it just means that they're going to try to match it as closely as possible. That's the buyer requirement, is the color swatches. Match with the swatch again. Then what they're going to do is they're going to create lab dips, which we'll look at a little bit closer in the next slide. The buyer will look at the lab dips, either approve a dye lot or reject it and send it back with suggestions on each one. Maybe say this one needs 2% more red or 5% more yellow or things like that. They'll try again until you get that buyer approval, and then they'll go and use that chemical recipe to dye the rest of the lot. So these are what lab dips look like. They're sort of two different pictures showing lab dips from two different mills. You can sort of just tell that because they have slightly different formats. Every mill will have a slightly different layout and form sheet for their dye lots and lab dips, but they kind of all look the same. Now each one of these is using 3, which is kind of the minimum. Depending again on your price point, you're going to want to go with at least 3 samples with your lab dips. However, I've seen lab dips with as much as 8 to 10 different color swatch dye recipes for approval. So basically every color in the collection is represented on these swatches. So if we take a look at these, they all look like the same color, but they're all slightly different because they're used a different chemical recipe or dye recipe is used in each one. And each one is sort of a different attempt to match the color standard. Now what a design company will do, if it's a small company or a smaller company, a design assistant or low-level employee, not necessarily low level, will look over these. Now a lot of larger companies will have color specialists that only deal in color coordination. That's their whole job. They help create the color palettes, and they also oversee all of the color coordination and quality control. Whoever is doing this is going to take each one of these guys and look at them under a full spectrum lamp. Now these are special lamps made for colorists and utilized in any area where color matching is really important. So they're used in jewelry, they're used in interior design, paint matching, and of course designers use them as well. What's special about these lamps is they have a full spectrum light, which allow colors to show through a little bit more vividly. So I can relate it to sort of a sunny day. If you ever noticed, if the sun is really bright and brilliantly shining, the colors outside seem a little lighter, a little brighter, a little bit more vivid than they do on a gray day. They seem a little bit duller and things like that. So these lamps are really meant to match like the light that comes from the sun on a bright sunny day, that will allow even minute differences in color to be visible to the color specialists. Now, as mentioned before, if one of these guys matches perfectly, we just say which one. So say we'll take this orange one, I say this one right here, this one matches. That's the chemical recipe we want. If it doesn't happen, I'll make corrections, send it back to the mill for them to try again, and they'll send me back another set of lab dips. And basically that process will happen over and over again until we come to the approval of a dye recipe. Now, stripes and plaids are a little bit differently because they are colored slightly differently. So as I mentioned before, solid colors, especially for wovens, are made or colored after they are actually woven. So the yarns are woven in at a bleached or neutral color, and then they are dyed. For stripes and plaids, and now this is not all, but most stripes and plaids on wovens are what are called yarn dyed. So that means that the actual yarns are dyed before weaving, and then they are arranged in particular patterns to create the stripes and plaids that we need. That's why if you look at like woven plaids, if you look at like sort of a specific plaid where a light color intersects a darker color, you'll get that sort of blend of the two colors, but when a darker stripe and a darker stripe intersect, you get the really vivid color. So because the dyeing is done before the weaving happens, what will typically happen is a process very similar to lab dips, but they're not sending us little swatches of fabric, they're sending us the yarns. Sort of look what will look like before. Now the same thing applies where different dye recipes are applied to the individual yarns and then sent for approval or comment and things like that. Now, in addition to our little yarn skeins that we get to test our colors out, they'll typically send us a small swatch of the finished woven fabric with the stripe or plaid design that we would like. Now this allows us to see how the yarns will look in their final version, and we can also make edits to the stripe and plaid design as well. Now prints, as you can imagine, are a little bit more complicated when it comes to color matching. In order to ensure the correct look and color for a printed fabric, a designer will request what's called a strike-off. A strike-off are small samples of a print done so a designer can approve the color and look of a print for their collection. So again, there's also lots of different ways to create prints. I'm not going to go into them right now. Maybe we'll do it another day on how prints are created and all the different methods. But there are many different ways to create printed fabric, from very old world techniques to very new techniques. But whichever way your mill is going to create their print, they're going to create a small sample. Again, it's going to be larger than your typical swatch. It's certainly going to include at least one, if not several, repeats of the print, and send it to you as, of course, what is called a strike-off, for you to comment on and correct. Now you can tweak different things, tweak different colors in it, tweak the layout once you see it, things like that, until you can get to a print that you can approve for your collection. Now here's just another example. Over here on the right is just another example of a strike-off. And here is actually a company strike-off request. So this is what a designer or third-party communicator would send to the mill to request a strike-off. So what they're doing is right here, this is not an actual fabric swatch. It is a graphic that they have sent. Now they'll send this on this card, and they'll probably send a digital file of that as well. Included, they've sent a color palette of all the colors utilized in the print, and they've also noted what the ground colors will be. Now when we're talking about a ground color, especially for print, it's the background color here. So, oops, sorry. Oh, how do I go back? Okay. Didn't mean to do that. it's the ground color here. This is the background color. So for this swatch, pink would be our ground color. Black would be our ground color. Dark blue would be, or a blue, bright blue here, and a lighter blue would be our ground color here. So that's just what that means. Now it's also showing different versions of what it should look like on the outside and inside of the fabric. So again, this is really just to help the mill try to match this example in this standard as closely as possible. And here they're indicating that when they do the strike off, they must include at least 1.5 full repeats. So as you know, probably from FD13, prints are done in repeats, which means that we make one small design and then basically repeat it over and over and over again to fill up the fabric, and we can repeat it in different sort of brick styles, like a grid or a 1/2 slide grid, or all those different things to create a print. Now knits, again, are a little bit of a different story. So knits are done with yarns. As you know, the difference between woven fabrics and knits is woven fabrics are made out of many interlocking yarns. However, knit fabrics are made out of one continuous yarn looping amongst itself. So since a singular yarn will be used to knit many different knit stitches and knit styles, we will get a yarn skein with different dye lots and dye samples, much as I showed you in the example for stripes and plaids, but we'll also include small knit swatches indicating the different types of knit patterns intended to be used in a garment. And these are called knit downs, and they provide the designer the ability to sort of edit and approve certain knit designs and textures that are going to be used in their garments. So here we see a couple examples of our knit downs. So here we have a small swatch, and again it's showing this sort of horizontal ribbing, a 1x1 vertical ribbing, as well as a sort of cable knit and these sort of fancier designs here. Here we're seeing sort of a sample of a cable knit. Here we're just seeing a plain knit with a rib trim. Here we're actually seeing a two-tone color pattern. Here we're seeing, what is that? It looks almost like a stockingette knit or a waffle knit. It's a little small for me to tell. But again, we're going to try to cram in all the different knit textures and patterns that will be used in a collection in these tiny little swatches. Again, for the designer to say, oh, maybe I need this to be a little bit bigger, or maybe I want this to twist 3 times, or maybe it needs to have some bigger spacing, and things like that, to really sort of fine-tune every single aspect of your knit design before it is knitted in bulk. Once all that has been done, lab dips for your solid colors, your knit downs for your knits, your yarn dye lots, and swatches for stripes and plaids, strike-offs for prints, or whatever is relevant. Once that gets approved, not even then are we quite ready to go straight to bulk fabric. Now, some companies may, but it's much more often that before we go from sample yardage, we'll go from these quality control checks to a sample yardage. So the sample yardage is a smaller yardage than the bulk production will be. However, the sample yardage, the exact amount, will depend on the company. Smaller companies may just need a few yards. Larger companies will need potentially hundreds of yards. And this is really will be determined by how many sample garments they intend to make. So if you remember, our sample garments are used to sort of test and provide samples of the collection. So if we're making many samples, potentially for sample sales and things like that, we might have to get a couple hundred yards for a sample yardage. If we're just creating sample yardage or sample garments to fill out a line sheet or something like that, we may just need several yards of each fabric used. And again, this is going to give us one last step of seeing how the fabric will perform in a finished garment. So because our sample garments will be made out of this sample yardage, we get to see how the fabric sort of falls, feels in a real garment, comes together, and really handles when it is put into the finished garment. Now, if there are any additional changes that need to be made based on, again, how it performs in the sample garments, they will and can still be implemented before the bulk production. So again, we don't jump the gun and go straight to bulk production, because then we'll end up with 5,000 yards of a fabric that has an issue with it. But once we do get through sample production, and everything works out okay, and there aren't any more things that we might need to change or alter or test through, we will go through with bulk production. And again, this is the fabric that will be sent directly to a garment factory after it's made or bought to produce the final looks of a collection that will be sold in stores. Down here again, we have a mill creating fabric from fiber that will be sent out to a garment factory, and we base this bulk production order on the orders for garments that we have gotten in. So again, once those sample garments are made, we're able to create line sheets, go to trade shows with our collections, so on and so forth, and get an idea of how many garments will need to be made to fulfill our orders from retailers or from clients and different things like that. So we use that information, say, okay, I need, I know that 500, orders of this dress are going to be needed. Okay, the 500 dresses need to be made. They utilize 3 yards of fabric. So that'll be 1,500 yards that need to be ordered, so on and so forth. And we'll do this for every garment that is, or every fabric that is needed to be produced within our collection. And here again, we have our factory down here and a purchase order with that, every mill or distributor are going to have their own order forms and things like this, but we can see here that someone is ordering about 12,000 meters, which is close to a yard. This is just you can tell by the unit price. They're an English designer, so they use meters instead of yards, but it's pretty close. So they're buying 1,200 of this viscose, a printed spun viscose, as their bulk order, and they have some bulk details down here too. Test report must be provided without fail. You must send a 5 meters from the bulk batch to ensure color continuity. So that's not rare. Lots of times certain amounts of yardage will be requested to be sent to the designer for sort of quality control and their own testing, so on and so forth. Now we're going to get into testing right next in our section of quality control. So we've already gone through a bunch of quality control checks for fabrics pre-woven, but we have another series of checks post bulk production. So bulk production fabric quality. So after the bulk yardage for a collection has been woven, but before it gets cut and sewn, and often either during the time it's being shipped to a garment factory or before it is being shipped, it will go through third-party testing to ensure overall quality and durability. A sample of the bulk yardage is sent and will be tested, and it's usually tested at least once by a third-party inspector, but it's also usually inspected in-house or by the mill itself, and sometimes, although rarer, will be tested by the designer themselves. So the bulk yardage is typically tested at least once, again by the third party, probably a second time in-house by the mill, and most rarely, but it does happen, a third time by the actual design company. Intertek is one of the leading fabric testers in the world. There are many companies that do third-party testing, but Intertek is one of the industry standards. We're just going to take a little peek at their website. So here's their website, and a lot of what I have down here that talks about everything that they test for, different standards. So it's, again, if you've never sort of done any of this or are used or knowledgeable about any of these testing procedures, it's interesting to just sort of go through and take a look at this website to see sort of, what people get done, what they're looking for, so on and so forth. And there are lots of different, again, third-party testers. Intertek is just one of the major ones. So here's an Intertek fabric test report. So the yardage will be sent again to Intertek or another third party, and they'll test a variety of different aspects of the fabric. These are pretty much what they look like. You can kind of peruse them. You can sort of see, the different results, requirements, standards. So what will happen is the fabric will test different aspects of the fabric. The designer and the mill have agreed to certain standards. So say, tensile strength, that has to be this strong, color change, it has to go through at least this amount of washing before we see color changes. And those sort of standards are agreed upon in the order contract between the designer and the mill. So the mill has to contractually meet these standards. And this is, again, why testing is so important. We get to really see if the mill is providing us with fabric with the quality that we desire and that we have contractually agreed upon. So what aspects of a fabric that get tested will depend on the design company and the intention of the garments. So again, every design company is going to have different needs from their test results and different needs from their fabric. So just for example, a company selling really high performance technical garments, like garments that are made for like outdoor survival, or even, dance garments that are made to need to hold up to vigorous movement and stretching over a long period of time, or work garments, so garments made for workers that are meant to be strong and tough and durable. They will be subject to much more rigorous testing and demand much higher quality standards. Companies selling kind of low performance clothing, like your cheap sweatpants that all you're going to do is sit around and watch Netflix in, kind of like, I guess, what we're all doing these days, especially at lower price points, will have lower standards and require more minimal testing. Again, because they are not high performance. They don't have to hold up against different things like, movement or durability or color safe. And again, you can see with really high performance things and the intent of the garment, just how important some of these fabric tests are. So say you are designing a really high performance outerwear for a technically specific, an outdoor company, maybe REI or North Face or something like that, where people are going to be buying this outerwear in hopes that they don't freeze to death when they go up on the mountain. So of course you're going to have to test for things that other things aren't going to need. Those outerwear that need to keep you warm and safe when you're mountain climbing are going to have to go through a series of insulative tests to see, yes, they can keep you warm, yes, they can perform even wet, they can cut wind. Whereas if you're just making graphic tees with, a design logo on it, just meant for casual wearing, you don't need to do all of that extensive testing. So even though what is going to get tested will vary greatly depending on the company and the intent of the garment, some of the general things that get tested are listed here. So fiber content. So the fiber content of a fabric will be tested to ensure that it is what the mill has promised it to be. It's a series of chemical and very highly scientific tests that will guarantee you, if the mill is selling you 100% cotton something, that it is indeed 100% cotton. They're not sneaking any poly in there to kind of cheap out on the price or anything like that. And this, of course, is important because this will be used in the labeling of the final garment. So if you guys have probably noticed, in each one of your garment there is a content listing that is legally required to be there. And again, you are responsible not only for it being there, but for it being accurate. And having a third-party tester tell you without a doubt the content will help you greatly in accurately creating your content labeling for your garments. The testing can also help in care instruction labeling. So in addition to our content labeling, we typically will find care instructions which might say dry clean only, or wash in cold water, or so on and so forth. So when we're testing our garment, we will test its color fastness. So again, how many times do we wash it? In what temperature do we wash it? Does it lose its color faster in hot water or cold water? Can we bleach it? What does dry cleaning do to the color and to the quality? And things like that. Also dimensional stability. So, should we be washing this by hand with, being gentle with it? Can we put it through a high spin on the washer? Or will it warp like crazy when we do that? Can we hang dry it instead of putting it in a tumble dry? Should we tumble dry low? So all of these different things, they're basically washed in all these different aspects, all these different options that we have when washing to see how the garment will behave. And it will, in the end, we will apply that information to our care labeling. So if we find that dry cleaning will be best for this type of garment, we'll label dry cleaning. If we note that it can basically be washed as normal, just the temperature has to be cold and it should be hung dry instead of machine dried, we'll include that based again on their test results. We'll also do a bunch of physical testing. Color fastness to light. So again, as you probably have noticed sometimes, bright light can fade colors over time. So how quickly will bright light and sunlight fade the dye colors? We'll rub it to see if it will snag. We'll rub it to see if it will pill. How quickly will it pill? So what is pilling? So a lot of times when knit fabrics or like flannels or something that has a bit of a nap or a fuzziness to it, those fuzziness will kind of clump together in what's called a pill. We also have what's called fabric shavers that we can sort of shave fabric to get rid of these pills. But high quality fabric will pill in lower frequency and lower frequency than high quality fabrics. Also strength. So little machines will pull the fabric apart to see what sort of force is needed to get the fabric to tear. So again, if we need really strong fabrics, we're going to be looking for really high tensile strength, and that is when we pull fabric, its strength is how much force can it hold being pulled apart before it tears. Abrasion, so we'll have little machines like this one here that will rub and rub and rub and rub and rub and rub and rub the fabric until it starts to wear away. And depending on how many rubs it takes to start to wear away, that's a higher quality fabric. If it starts wearing away pretty short after the beginning of the abrasion test, it's fairly weak. And again, this one is pressing it to see how it can be squished. It will hold up to being really squished and pressed really tight, and different chemical tests and things like that, final pH. and things like that will be done. And these are typically done for all fabrics. And again, some fabrics might be more tested, some might be less tested. Now, you may ask, what happens if it doesn't pass the test? Well, in sort of the best world, you would imagine the entire lot is rejected, and they start over, and adherence to quality standards are always met. Now, this may be the case in our very high-performing garments. Again, there is a lot of liability when you need a garment to really perform under stress, whatever that stress may be. And in those situations, if it doesn't pass the test, yeah, the entire bulk lot will be scrapped and they will start again. And again, that will be outlined in the contract between the designer and the mill. So that will be on the mill. The mill could not meet the contractual fabric standards, so it will be created again to meet it at their cost. So there is a lot of incentive on the mill's part to meet these quality standards. And again, that is specifically for companies creating high performance garments that absolutely need to perform. I mean, can you imagine if we were a garment a producer creating uniforms for firemen, and we decided to just go ahead with a bulk order that didn't pass the testing on insulation? We would have some very angry, very burnt firemen coming after us. It would be very negligent and irresponsible on our part. However, most fashion companies do not have this sort of high performance need. Obviously you would think, oh, well, luxury markets, they are high price points, so they want high quality fabric. Well, yes, but no one's really going to get burnt if that fabric doesn't perform. In fact, it's not really going to do anything. It's just going to fall apart faster. And so a customer may or may not buy again from them. But at the end of the day, what happens when these fabric requirements aren't met in testing is the fabric or the design companies will negotiate with the mill for a lower price on the fabric. So it will not get scrapped. The bulk order will not get remade. Now, why in this case would a fabric company reject the offer of remaking a bulk lot at the mill's cost? It doesn't seem to make sense, right? It doesn't cost the fabric company anymore. And if they have already contractual agreements as to fabric quality and standards, it would have to be the mill's cost. Well, this comes into timeline. Remember that everything was due yesterday. If it gets to the point where a fabric company has to remake the entire bulk production, it could delay the start of garment manufacturing by a week or more. And that could delay the shipment to stores and clients and retailers, again, by that same amount of time. And design companies and garment manufacturers will do anything to prevent this. This is because if you're late in your shipments, all of your retail clients and stores and customers are going to start wanting refunds because they have due dates and deadlines as to when they are promised to receive their product. So therefore, most design companies, when faced with substandard fabric results, will simply negotiate with the mill for a refund on the actual bulk purchase. So, for example, say I'm your average fashion company, and the mill produces a fabric for me that fails in tensile strength. We have contractually agreed to a certain standard for tensile strength. Since it failed, what I'm going to do is say, hey, you didn't meet this requirement. I want, a 10% discount per yard. And again, this is much better for most fabric companies to do. It keeps us on schedule. It gets us a discount. In the end, it lowers the actual quality of our product. But honestly, in today's market, the clientele knows so little about fabric quality that it doesn't really matter. In fact, most quality standards are there just to try to get discounts from the mill, not to please the customer. I know it sounds pretty cynical, but I mean, it's true. Garments today, for the most part, and most people's needs, don't really need to be that high performing and don't really need to be that long lasting. What with fast fashion, it's really gone the other way. Clothing has sort of dropped to the bottom of the barrel quality to be able to be offered at such low prices. So that's what happens, sort of two different alternatives of what happens when our tests fail, our fabric testing fails. That ends basically our little overview of quality and fabric sourcing. Hope you enjoyed it. We have assignment to go along with it. Let me pull it up. It's going to be posted on Blackboard, of course. But here we are. It's your fabric sourcing assignment. It'll be due next Monday. The objective is designers must source where their fabrics will come from. The designers must choose the right quality fabric for the right price. Now, you have already created a mood board in your first assignment in relation to your trend forecasting and researching assignment. So you have a mood board, and so you can base this assignment on that mood board. Now, if you'd like to create another mood board, if you didn't really, you want to kind of do something different, you can. Just trying to make it a little bit easier and sort of build off the assignments that we have done. But you're going to source fabrics based on the collection that mood board or a mood board that you create is representing. So research online fabric importers and wholesale distributors, because all the trade shows are canceled and you're probably not getting into them anyways. So, go online, research some distributors for fabrics to build a collection, again, based on the mood board from your first assignment. The requirements for this assignment is as follows. To create a list of fabrics that will be used in your collection. And again, I'm not asking you at this point to actually design the collection. This is sort of project what might be in this collection, what garments, etc. would be used, so on and so forth. Include all available fabric information that you find, such as fiber content, weight, price, etc. And again, really important that you should be focusing in on the wholesale market and not the retail market. So just to reiterate, although you probably know this, retail market is made for like home sewers and people that are going to be doing small one-off projects at home. And these are really, places like Mood or Elegant Fabrics. They are your retail fabric distributors. Your wholesale are really meant for garment producers. They are selling in higher quantities of yardage. Like, you can't go to a wholesaler and be like, I want 3 yards of this. You have to go to a wholesaler and say, I want 100 yards of this. So, make sure you're targeting your efforts and your research in the right direction. Copy and paste images of the fabric alongside their information. Again, in the real world, swatches would be used in this instance. But images will do for now, obviously. Got to cut a few corners. Along with each fabric, describe what garments would be used to create. They would be used to create in the collection. So again, if you have sourced, a cotton poplin or something like that, say, okay, this will be used for a collared shirt. Or an empire dress or something like that. Include also a brief outline of why you selected the fabrics you did, what price point you are working with, and how your chosen fabrics need to perform in the collection. So what do they need to do? Do they need to feel a certain way? Do they need to flow a certain way? Do they need to be strong? Do they need to stretch? What do they need to do? So we know, that we are choosing the right fabrics. So again, this will be due on the 30th. Oh, also, if you want to include your in your list of fabrics, there's sourcing. That's like kind of the point. I'll include that in there. So if you sourced it from a particular wholesaler's website, please include that. And if you have any questions on the assignment, just let me know. This sheet will be posted up to Blackboard along with this video. Of course, you're probably finding it there, and YouTube as well. Just a quick note, moving forward, I don't have a ton of capacity for course content on Blackboard. So what I will be doing is once I start to reach that capacity, I'm going to be taking old videos down. However, all videos will be posted to the YouTube channel, KCC FD92, and I will not have to take any of those videos down. So if there's something you missed or wanted to go back to, just go to that YouTube channel. And I think too that that's just a good source. In addition, I can post longer videos of higher quality, so on and so forth. So check out the YouTube channel if you are missing a video or if you're having trouble accessing these videos. Seems silly to say in a video, but anyways, that concludes our lesson for today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see you next week.